The Texas A&M Aggies are back in the College World Series as they begin their quest for a national championship under head coach Jim Schlossnagle. Here helping us break it all down, all things Texas A&M, our good friend Ryan Brauninger of TexAgs, once again, one of the best in the business when it comes to talking all things Texas A&M, especially Aggies baseball. Ryan, what's going on, my friend? We talked about last week. We had a feeling we might be back here yet again, and sure enough, here we are. Just a couple days away before the action gets going in Omaha.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on again, Chris. It seems like since we've been doing these weekly, A&M's been winning games. So I think if I quit doing them when they got to Omaha, Jim Schlossnagle may come after me. So, you don't mess with a winning streak, as they say on Bull Durham. But no, man, what a wild super regional. A&M wins 2 games by a combined score. Let's see, it was 10-6 and then 15-9. So they win by 10 total runs. And through the first 3 innings of both games, you'd have never thought that those would be the outcomes. And so they had to overcome a lot of adversity, probably more adversity than they faced the entirety of the year. The roster is going to look a little different, obviously, here in Omaha after some injuries, but they're here. And, talking to a lot of the players this week, obviously they're discouraged by losing talented guys, but they're also encouraged by kind of how the whole thing went down last week at Bluebell Park. And that finale, Chris, let me tell you something, man. You talked about it, and I'll give you credit because you were one of the first ones on this. Bluebell Park is an elite scene in college baseball. Dude, I'm just telling you, Sunday night against Oregon was as electric of a college baseball atmosphere as I played in, coached in, been to, watched, seen on TV. It sounded like Kyle Field. It really did. It was super electric, man.
You mentioned the super region. Let's zero in on that, Ryan. What did you feel like you learned about this Texas A&M team? Because, again, like you mentioned, you look at those final scores, and it doesn't tell the full story, right? Especially in the second game when Oregon, essentially had control of that ball game for 2/3 of it. And I feel like the resiliency and a lot of character was shown by Texas A&M in both games. Again, especially that second one where you have a 9-run inning and you just explode. And like you mentioned, Bluebell Park was rocking. But what do you feel like coming out of the Super Regionals you learned about Texas A&M? Was there anything new in particular that showed itself from this Aggies club?
Yeah, I don't know if it was new, Chris, but I would say that it's something shined through that we don't talk about enough, or we haven't talked about enough with this team, because when you watched A&M play and you started going through the preseason prognosis about this Texas A&M team, the number one thing that we on TexAgs and then everybody nationally wanted to talk about was the talent, like the raw talent on this roster. You're talking about 3 potential first-round picks to start the order. Ryan Prager coming back off of injury this year. Evan Eichenbeck being one of the best closers in the game. Chris Cortez with just elite stuff. But one thing we didn't talk anything about or enough about, Chris, was the toughness, the camaraderie, the experience, the guile of the kids on this roster. And I think that is what was at the forefront against Oregon. Obviously, there were some moments where you saw the depth for Caden Kent to come in, and it wasn't just the grand slam. It was the overall weekend that he had. So you saw some of the depth. You saw some of the pitching depth. You had a true freshman in Caden Wilson in the second game against Oregon get out of a bases loaded, nobody out jam without giving up a run. How big was that in the final outcome of the game? So you saw some of that talent and depth, but overall, man, it was about those kids and overcoming adversity. They got socked right in the face. And you've been around competitive sports long enough. When you're one of your best players in Braden Montgomery, it's clear that he's got something very wrong with his leg after it happens, right? Like everybody could see it. It's the foot's dangling there. It's an awful scene, and it is dead silent at Bluebell Park. And on top of that, Ryan Prager, who has been unbeatable at home, allows 6 runs in an inning and 2/3. So 2 back-to-back just gut punches for your club, and then you rally and win. And so there's some momentum in your clubhouse and in your locker room going into the second game. And Shane Sdao lasts 11 pitches before he calls the trainer out, and he's looking at his arm. And I've been around the game a long time, Chris. You kind of know what that look means, right? And it's unfortunate. And again, it's just a gut punch. And then from there, you're trying to piece it together. Oregon hits back-to-back homers in the first. And on no scenario on that A&M coaching staff's, their chalkboard, their whiteboard for that super regional, did they have Ryan Prager is going to throw 35 pitches, Shane Sdao is going to throw 11. Like there was no game plan for that. So they were just about piecemealing it together. And so I think like they obviously you get wobbled by stuff like that. That's a couple blows to the jaw, right? But man, they righted themselves. They stood in there, stood in there, and they were up for the fight. And I think when you look at A&M, like I said, that talent is what everybody talks about. But what we saw last weekend at Super was a lot of gumption and a lot of mettle that I think people aren't talking enough about.
Ryan, you mentioned going into the College World Series. Of course, we got to talk about the injuries to Braden Montgomery, one of the best players in college baseball, and then Sdao at the back end of the bullpen. How does that affect Texas A&M moving forward? I saw a lot on social media, and obviously I think Schloss talked about this, the next man up mentality, and it worked against Oregon. And it really, again, like you mentioned, being able to withstand adversity and overcome it. But now you go into the College World Series, and let's face it, you're without one of the best players in the game. You're without one of the best players in your lineup. And I know that, he went cold in the month of, I believe it was, April or May, right? Hit like
May,
150. Month of May, went cold. So A&M has been able to overcome him not being a major part of what they do, but still to lose him entirely ahead of the College World Series. How do you expect A&M to combat that, both with Montgomery's loss and then back into the bullpen as well?
Well, I think when you look at Braden, I think what we saw in the Super Regionals, what we're going to see here in Omaha, you're going to see Caden Kent go in at second base. You're going to see Travis Chestnut slide from second base to center field. And that's the way they're going to roll. And I think it'll be the same 1 through 9. Jim Schlossnagle tinkered with the batting order in that finale against Oregon. He hit Jackson Appel leadoff, moved Gavin Grahovic behind Jace Lavalette. They're just looking for anybody in the order that can give Jace some protection, right? Because now that Braden's out, he offered just the most incredible protection for Jace. And, Jace is obviously supremely talented, but having that help behind him probably pushed him to that 28 home run total of first team all SEC caliber season. But, I think that's what we're going to see. Obviously, it hurts their depth, right? Because you're getting one of your key depth pieces now in the starting lineup. So, if something else were to happen, maybe you need a runner late in the game. Hayden Schott's playing with an incredibly painful knee problem, and he was super regional MVP, even with that bad wheel. But if you get into a spot late in the game where he's on second base and he's the tying or go-ahead run, you're going to want to run for him, right? And so, what does that do to the remaining depth of the roster? And then on the pitching side with Sdao out, look, Shane Sdao had emerged into a legit number 2 in this league, and he was well on his way, Chris, to being what I think will be another really talented A&M team next season. He's well on his way to being the Friday night guy for next year's club. And then he has this injury. We still don't know the complete diagnosis. Jim Schlossnagle said today that he won't pitch in the College World Series. We know that. But they were a little bit more encouraged for the long-term prospects of what he could mean for the program next year than maybe they were when he walked off the field last Sunday. But that's where it gets interesting, man, is because now, A&M really hasn't had a number 3 starter over the last month and a half, 2 months. They've been going with an opener in Brad Rudis in that number 3 spot. And Prager and Sdao had just been nails in game 1 and game 2. So now what happens? You have to start looking at matchups. Does Florida have a fault that Chris Cortez may be able to exploit? Or do they struggle with guys that throw from a low quarter arm slot, like a Brad Rudis or a Brock Peary on the A&M staff? So, I would still think Ryan Prager would get the ball in game 1. Why wouldn't he? He's been your game 1 guy all year. But now with, a very limited starting rotation and what you can do, I don't think they're going to run Chris Cortez out there as a starter, man. Let me ask you this, Chris. You watch a ton of college baseball. Mm-hmm. In terms of pure stuff, just stuff, can you name me 5 guys in college baseball with better stuff than Chris Cortez right now?
No, absolutely not.
It's like Hagen Smith, Chase Burns, and then who else?
Yeah.
He's right there in that discussion. So
I think Aschenbeck and Cortez in the back, that's as good as you're going to get back in the book. And I was talking to somebody about this on a side note the other day that we don't really see a lot anymore what feels like a setup man closer type of situation in college baseball. That's really more the pro game. Again, that's as good as it's going to get at the back end. As good as it's going to get.
Yeah, and Cortez, what he's been able to do is because he's been so much more consistent in the strike zone, and he can rip that slider in any count now, which was unheard of, like unthinkable 12 months ago. Because he can do that, they're bringing him into games in the 3rd, 4th inning and letting him go. letting him go to 70, 80 pitches. So do we see Chris in that role with an opener in front of him at some point? Like, is that how you combat the Shane Sdao loss? Then obviously Aschenbeck, you're going to pitch him if you're tied or you've got the lead, regardless of what's happened ahead of him. So, it'll be super interesting how Jim Schlossnagle and Max Wiener manage the pitching side, especially the starting pitching side. I'm of the believer, Chris, that outs are outs. You start with 27 of them. It doesn't matter if Brad Rudis starts the game and he gets you the first 9 outs, or if he comes in the 7th inning and gets you 6 there. Outs are outs. You've got to get 27 of them. So the order in which they go, I don't really care, for me personally. But I think that Jim Schlossnagle and Max Wiener are going to try to play that game as well. Like, okay, we're clearly, our starting rotation is nowhere near where we thought it was going to be coming into this thing. How do we combat it? How do we get creative? Who can steal us 3, 4, 5 outs at a time in the middle of a game? And maybe you have to do that, to get yourself to next week. I don't know. It'll be super interesting to watch.
So as we look ahead, as the weekend gets underway, Ryan, and the College World Series gets going, Texas A&M in bracket 2, as you take a look at the bracket 2, what's interesting about that, 3 SEC teams, 1 ACC team. Bracket 1 obviously is flipped, 1 SEC, 3 ACC. So as we look at what Texas A&M, Ryan's got to navigate to get to the College World Series final, have an opportunity to win a national title, you got Florida, who you play obviously first game. We'll get into that in a second. But Florida, Kentucky, NC State. When you saw that, what was your immediate reaction to the draw that the Aggies have and what they'll have to navigate through to get to that College World Series final?
Yeah, I think that when I looked at it, it's Kentucky's the outlier because NC State plays more like a traditional SEC team. Then obviously Florida can match anybody in terms of physicality and overall talent. We knew that when they were hovering or, right at 500 in April, and then we're going, okay, they'll come out of it. And they didn't come out of it. It's May. And I'm telling you this, and I told Nick De La Torre, who's a good friend of mine, I was in Hoover at the Hoover Met when they were really, like, a lot of folks thought Florida needed to win a game, and they came out flat and laid a total egg, dude. And I couldn't believe – I was like, man, with your postseason on life support, that's how you come out and play. And they got in, and it was like that gave them that second breath of life on their season. And then obviously we've seen them play way closer to their talent level over the last couple of weeks. But, I don't think that for A&M and Florida, like I think that a lot of times we use these two words, comfortability and familiarity, interchangeably. I don't think that's always the case. Just because you're familiar with something doesn't mean you're comfortable. Now, I do think it takes a little bit of the edge off playing in Omaha, right? These two teams know each other. They played each other in Gainesville. It was a great series to start the SEC slate. Florida won the finale, I think 4-2. They got, I think Luke Heyman hit an 8th inning, bottom of the 8th, 2-run homer, and that was the difference in the game. Otherwise, like the entire weekend was pretty much even. So I think we're going to be we got a good ball game coming up, like in store to watch for the neutral. I think it's going to be very even. I'll be interested to see how Florida pitches it. Right, those freshmen that they threw all year are no longer freshmen. Who does Kevin O'Sullivan rely the most upon in Game 1 of a College World Series? I think it'll probably be Brandon Neely. I mean, he's been great, right? But what after that? Kind of the same thing we're asking A&M. What happens after, if it's Ryan Prager, what happens after that to try to prepare them for the remainder of the week? But in terms of that side of the bracket, Kentucky's the one that's probably the most different matchup for everybody because of how much they want to bunt and run. I mean, the way they scored runs against Oregon State was like right in the middle of the Nick Mingione playbook. Like, he probably hides some secrets at the first of the book, and then right when you get to the thick, biggest page, big, bold letters, that's how they want to play, and that's how they score runs.
So, Ryan, you just highlighted it, but I'll ask you again, taking on the Florida Gators in that first game, it's the Saturday night matchup. I'd imagine it's going to be an electric atmosphere with Aggies, Gators, and those that just love college baseball and SEC baseball in attendance. Like you mentioned, these two teams played each other earlier in the season, but I would argue they're much, much different, especially Florida, I think, than they were back in early or mid-March, if you will. What you're expecting from this game, and, like, what's the mentality from the A&M side when you're facing a Florida team that, again, you took the series from, right? And Florida struggled all year, but they are a buzzsaw right now.
Florida took the series.
Florida took the series. Okay,
Florida won on Sunday.
That was the upset. That's right.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So Okay, so then I guess there's an edge there for Texas A&M to get that revenge, but still, like, it's a brand new season. I mean, none
Right.
of that really even matters. And again, you're taking on a Florida team that, for all their deficiencies, they're as hot as anybody in college baseball.
Yeah, and their roster is littered with MLB draft picks, just like it is every year under Kevin O'Sullivan. I think these two teams in this ballpark, they're similar, right? Both teams really swing the bat. They like to slug, hit the ball, the ballpark, home runs, doubles, that kind of thing. But for A&M is, I think, one of the keys. Obviously, anytime you play Florida, is how many people are on base when Jack Caglione comes up, and then what do you do with him if there are people on base? Over the course of a series, I think you can pick your spots, right? Like, okay, like maybe here we can go after him, but in a one game scenario, you don't pick spots. Hey, we're going to put him on first base, right? And we're going to make the rest of that super talented Gator roster try to beat us, because Jack has been obviously one of the best players we've ever seen in college baseball. I think that's fair to say, because of his two-way abilities and then the overall numbers he's put up offensively. Look, Jim Schlossnagle called Jack Caglione the best first baseman he's ever seen. Regardless, pro, college, it doesn't matter. He's that good defensively. Then obviously you add these 120-mile-an-hour exit velos, and he's 95 on the mound. Like, what an incredible player. So in a one-game scenario, how do you pitch to him? Do you pitch to him at all? I think that will be something that maybe A&M was more aggressive with him in that series, and they may pick and choose their spots a little bit differently here in Omaha. But, man, I think Florida, because they're confident right now, like, you can throw their offensive and defensive numbers out, like whatever they've been struggling with, throw that out, because they're a completely different ball club. Because just like with any other team, belief is a massive, and I don't care what sport it is, man. Like, you start getting belief in a dugout or on the sideline of a football game or in the locker room and on the hardwood, like, when belief is a real thing. If you've got a shooter, if Wade Taylor starts believing the ball is going to go through the basket, it's bad news for the other team, right? Like, he starts getting confident and believing it, and he's going to put up 35 points before you can blink. So that's where I think Florida is as a group. I think A&M is like, I think they like this version of themselves that they found in the Super Regional, in terms of being like a gritty, almost, because there's a lot of folks talking this week, Chris, like, hey, look, A&M's obviously had an incredible season, but when you lose Braden Montgomery and you lose Shane Sdao, can you win a national championship? Like, that's two massive hits to your roster. And yeah, this team's good and it's talented, but a lot of folks are going, how realistic is it now? And so does that put a chip on the shoulder of this team? And look, there's no question that winning a national championship, A, to begin with, is very hard. B, when you lose two players like that this late in the year, it makes it even tougher. But there is, like, I think this team is kind of riding that, hey, we like feeling like we're the underdog. Like, we haven't had this all year. Everybody's had all these expectations on us, and now they're talking about other teams. So, yeah, I think A&M, I've got no idea, honestly, Chris, how they're going to play up here. Like, I don't, and that's the beauty of it, and that's why I'm so excited to watch how this thing kind of goes and unfolds on the field.
Saturday night, Aggies and Gators. We'll get after it. That's the prime time game, 6 o'clock local time, 7 o'clock Eastern. Ryan, I asked you this about a week ago today, and I'll ask you yet again. When you look at the College World Series, again, no Braden Montgomery, X factor for the Aggies when it comes to player that needs to have a big week, and what's the key for you for Texas A&M if we're going to be talking about them playing in that College World Series final next weekend?
Yeah, obviously, when you lose a superstar, you need the other ones that are deemed superstars to step up. So, yeah, I think Jace Lavalette has been great. He hadn't hit homers, but he's getting on base like crazy. He's getting hits. Like, his exit velos are north of 110. I think Gavin Grohovic needs to get going a little bit if A&M's going to have some success. He may have had maybe 2 hits, I think, in the Super Regional, maybe 1 singles, I believe, in both games. But when he gets going, man, he's a game changer, and he's one of the best, most talented freshmen in the country. So with Braden out, you're going to need to fill that kind of extra base slug role with somebody. But overall, like, you can't just look at Caden Kent because he had a legendary night and say, okay, that's Braden Montgomery's replacement. It's kind of a Moneyball approach, Chris. Like, you're not trying to recreate Braden Montgomery. You're trying to recreate him in the aggregate. So, like, in order to recreate Braden, everybody's going to have to kind of step up their game. So I don't know if there's one specific X factor, other than I think it's going to be hard for A&M to continue to produce their run outputs like they have without Grohovic and Lavalette really impacting the baseball like we know they can. So, and I'm confident that they can do that. Like Grohovic's kind of been up and down long enough where you're going, okay, this kid's due. Like he's way too good. And then Jace hasn't homered since the season finale against Arkansas. Again, his at-bats have been good. He's getting on base. He's driving in runs and he's scoring runs. But when Jace Lavalette hadn't left the ballpark in that long, I think probably Kevin O'Sullivan's going, oh, great. Like at some point, like you're only going to keep him down for so long. Imagine if Caglione went 3 weeks without hitting a homer. The next coach on his schedule is going to go, oh, crap. Like at some point, he's coming out of it, right? So I think both of those guys are due for some big games here in Omaha.
Yeah, I don't think that Jace Lavalette home run drought goes much longer, safe to say. Ryan Brauninger, TexAgs, again, one of the best in the business, talking all things Texas A&M Aggies baseball. Ryan, we appreciate you taking the time, my friend. Best of luck to the Aggies and enjoy the time in Omaha.
Yeah, buddy. We'll see you up here soon, huh?
We'll see you there.
Yeah, man.